Уважаемые дамы и господа, сессия 7 Балтика. Опасные воды начнет свою работу через минуту. Пожалуйста, занимайте ваши места. На сцену приглашаются модератор Федор Войтоловский, директор ММО РАН, Антон Алиханов, губернатор Калининградской области, Джан Цзянь, вице-президент, директор Китайской академии, Тарья Кронберг, научный сотрудник Стокгольмского международного института исследований проблем мира СИПРИ, бывший депутат парламента Финляндии, бывший депутат Европарламента Финляндии, Александр Грушко, заместитель министра иностранных дел Российской Федерации, Алексей Громыко, директор Института Европы РАН, Надежда Арбатова, заведующий отделом европейских политических исследований ММО РАН. Please welcome to the stage moderator Федор Войтоловский, director of Primakov Institute of World Economy and International Relations, Anton Alekhanov, governor of the Kaliningrad region, Tarja Kronberg, research fellow at Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, former member of the Parliament of Finland, former member of the European Parliament Finland. Alexander Grushko, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. Alexei Gromyko, Director of the Institute of Europe of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Nadezhda Arbatova, Head of the Department for European Political Studies, Primakov Institute of World Economy and International Relations.
Дорогие коллеги, мы рады приветствовать вас на сессии.
So when we were thinking about the concept of this session and the name of the session, we wanted just to with the participants to discuss very wide agenda, and the Baltics. We want just to put it in a wider context, in the global, regional, and political processes that are taking place there. That's when, for many years, we've been seeing that the Baltic region, in spite of contradictions, challenges between regional countries, not only between Russia and the Baltic countries and the Baltic, so I mean Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, but other regions, Poland, Germany. So they have their own challenges and difficulties, and have very difficult problems in the big Baltic Arctic region. So it's a logical development of events, and for many years, so it looked like that in the region. So there is a more or less stability of relationship problems. We thought there was this kind of stability, and now just we find ourselves in a situation where so the drama of the changes in the region has acquired a very disturbing dimension, and under the circumstances. We need to think very carefully. So what kind of big Baltics we would like to see? What we would like to see, in what shape we want to have this region? How the relationship in the region should develop, not only now, but several years down the road. So now they are living through a very dramatic period between the relationship, between Russia and the EU and the Baltic states. But one day, so there'll be the next turn, and then we'll need just to start our dialogue with something. And we need just to put our heads together. And so although the situation is disturbing, but we need to put our heads together and think how to do it. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Alekhanov, the governor of the Kaliningrad region. And I can tell you that that Kaliningrad region is kind of an outstation of Russia in the region. and this is the region of Russia that was involved in economic, trade, social, cultural, educational relations with cooperation with their neighbors from the EU. And this is the region that was actually suffered the most harsh pressure. And so remember just what kind of pressure was applied in the economic trading. Then the turnover and the cargo flow, transportation went down 33%, and so the trade turnover went down 33%. And at the same time, so the region is kind of handling and surviving of all these economic challenges of external nature. We can see the growth of investments. We can see that all the industries of Kaliningrad region, all the main companies, businesses operate. So then the automobile plant immediately adjusted itself. So Yantar company is working in a very stable fashion. So the amber plant, the amber factory. So then the utilization rate is 100%. So then the area is independent on food, self-sufficient on food. So the construction industry. So the region, Kaliningrad region, is going through this construction boom. Construction. So how, just in spite of this horrible pressure, you still find partners and develop? So the esteemed colleagues, effectively, we, in spite of the most recent disturbing times and this kind of enmity and dangerous narratives on the part of the NATO countries, say do not restrict themselves to words only and narratives, but they conduct military tests, military drills, whatever. And this certainly annoys us, and so then military exercises are held all the time, and so the pinnacle. Was the 2005 when it was celebrated 750 years anniversary of Kenigsberg or Kaliningrad. So where the bridge was commissioned, it's a drawbridge, and on one side, so Mr. Putin was walking, and Mr. Chirac, President of France, and the Chancellor of Germany, Schroeder, and they were just moving towards each other in this drawbridge, and so they were always saying that so this is the territory of accelerated development, the territory of cooperation, business, etc., and that was the pinnacle. And so we were very actively participating in different intergovernmental framework formats. Russia-Polish Council, traditionally the governor of Kaliningrad region participated traditionally, and then the cooling off started with the Baltics even before than 2014, starting from 2012 on the initiative of the then president of Lithuania. So we stopped contact so since 2020, and so then these meetings have been completely cut. And nevertheless, the relations were cut very abruptly. So we were involved economically. I mean, in trading with the EU. Certainly, the trading just went down, and but mostly because it happened that our big manufacturers, after Torm's automotive plant, refused to do business with the Western partners. Although the Western partners, and they say with great sadness, state that. They say certainly that they would like to go back to cooperate, but understanding the political situation, they have no possibility to do that and have to refrain from that. So the BMW went, so with Kia, Hyundai, so we suspended. But so then any vacuum is soon filled in. And so the partners, the Chinese partners, immediately just filled in the void, and so many companies, it took less than half a year after the automotive plant stopped, so it became started working again. So then, entire business industries we have to reconstruct. So we had very strong business of cargo. Our trucks traveled everywhere, and so then because of the tax breaks that we had in our region, so they were kind of flourishing. So now this market is closed. Many moved their businesses elsewhere to other regions where people started to work in different capacity. But I would say the big sectors have freed. And that is why, so then the economic growth is not only growth in Kaliningrad Oblast, but it's everywhere else, that's in Russia. So a lot of new niches of opportunities have opened up, which wait for replacement. Not only just moving towards eastern imports, but we can invest in our own businesses. So that's hence big growth of investments. So we saw the reduction of industrial production. So then we ended up last year 20% growth of investments. So this year for the first half of the year, so 43% investments growth. Business understands that this is a great opportunity to fill in the niches, to fill in the void. That's why they're willing and coming. So 43% investments growth. So there are some specifics. Certainly, you spoke about the pressure. And so then it's very disturbing to watch the random behavior and decisions that made by Lithuania, the European Commission, vis-à-vis Kaliningrad transit. So it's very sensitive for us because it was just the subject of agreement with the EU. So when these three countries joined the EU, and we agreed that this corridor should be, first they banned the transit, and then thank to our colleagues from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and our interventions in the media, so we managed to get this transit back, like non-sanctioned cargo, then railway transit. But still limited constraints, lots of constraints, very limited quotas. I don't know why. So for some reason we can just carry only certain volume of cement. And but there is a great deal of growth of housing construction, and so we broke a record in the history of the region in housing construction. We never built so much, and people are coming in spite of all these problems and talks. And so they blockade, the siege, whatever. We grew last year by 6,000 people, and more than 5,000 people came to live. And so my migration, people continue to come from different regions and live in Kaliningrad. So we continue to grow, and that is why we need to continue to apply pressure now on our neighbors to remove these limitations and sanctions. But we're ready for we're great business contacts, we're great humanitarian relations contacts, we're quite good. And our Baltics Federal University, named after Kant, so continues to have good cooperation with European universities. Certainly it went down a little, it's not as much as it used to be, but the potential of defreezing is defreezing potential. We need just to cultivate it, to continue working on it, because we all realize that the conflict will end one day, and we need to start preparing and forming the potential for negotiations. New rules need to be made. So there's to make sure that these new rules that will be set could not be abandoned unilaterally, and so transportation independence, etc., economic. We need just to work for that. So we didn't close the possibility for foreign trucks, cargo trucks to work at Kaliningrad market. So this unilaterally we refuse to close it down. So because geographically we are inscribed into the European cargo flows, and we need to maintain our transit potential. All these sanctions, hysterics on the part of our Baltic neighbors. So we've been developing a Chinese transit corridor. So in 2023, vis-a-vis 2020, container-wise, it grew 13 times from China to Kaliningrad. 13 times. So we have only 2 formats of gauges. So we would just do reload because the gauge was different, railway gauge, and they would just go be reloaded, transshipped, and then immediately they would go to Germany. And so we quickly adapting to this process. It's not only Russia, EU processes, it's Eurasian, trans-Eurasian transportation corridors. And then by way of 2 suggestions, I keep talking about that with our colleagues from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We spoke to them at length many times. So people from the Baltic states, people, and the European Union, our former compatriots, so they're talking about an attempt to bring back the ability to work. There is the Polish card, there is the Russian card, so that they could work in Russia. So let's say we can call it a compatriot card or whatever. So then kind of repatriation, soft repatriation program supporting our compatriots living abroad now, so that could be applied. Many would like just to come and try it out. And I think that through this legal mechanism, this is a Russian card or compatriot card, to give them a chance to do that and work. As I think that will take additional financial support measures and non-financial support measures, and we'll be happy to accept these people with their families, because we are a growing region. I think that migration supports us. Unfortunately, not because of the birth rate, but migration will continue to grow. We want just to maintain that trend. I spoke about the economic growth, Rosatom. So they're building a new plant, a battery building plant. So huge, 160,000 square meters. So the biggest plant in the region. So ion batteries construction, manufacturing plant. There's almost 1,000 people, 1,000 new jobs, high-paying jobs. And half of these people are not available, and they need to be brought in. We don't want just to compete only for labor resources from our regions, and we need to attract, so if they want to come. So then our former compatriots from Germany, so lots of people from Baltics, so they want to come and work. And electronic visa thing, and so on the orders of the president, we introduced the system of free electronic visa, this pre-COVID visa, and then we saw that in 7 months, 100,000 people came using these electronic visas, and special thanks to Mr. Lavrov when we were discussing that. So 54 countries were included in this list that could come just filling out a questionnaire, 19 questions, and then on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs side. So then we got lots of people coming that came and spent money here. So Lithuanians, every day they would just get a new electronic visa, just for every day a new. So every day, so they would fill it out, they would come and they were buying food, medicines, they would guess up, and I think that so every day they would do that. So this is position of openness when they have a chance to come and see that Kaliningrad is not like a hedgehog with tanks and missiles, but where we have the subsidiary of the Bolshoi Theater, the Trotikov Picture Gallery, subsidiaries being built. So people just taking care of the cultural heritage, and so with the great resorts. And that's very important to make it, to provide this information. Then, so we are just bringing back this electronic visa mechanism. And so it's not available to everyone, and I think that we need. So we, as a pilot territory, we could act as a region where this visa should become free, at least for a certain period of time, because the more people come, the more they believe, so the less they will believe to the propaganda machine. That's because the Poles and the Lithuanians that live not far, so they are less susceptible to their main media. But we need to widen the number of people who would come and know. And thanks that you turned our talk towards a social and humanitarian agenda. But I think that we'll come back to this issue, because there'll be other people who will like to intervene as well. But still, I wanted just to go back to something that probably is something that concerns all countries of the region, Russia and no lesser extent, and then Poland, the Baltics. Mainly the security. Tarik Kronder. Tarik Kronder. So you're a famous fighter for peace. So you are a person whose scientific career was closely related with political career. And you are the person who has made your results of your scientific positions, your research, your development, to turn it into your credo of your politics, a person who has always displayed a great deal of concern concerning the lack of international security. Now we see the trend towards the growth of military and social tension in the big Baltics. So access of Finland to NATO, joining NATO, then very harsh rhetoric on the part of NATO countries, and a strong position on the part of Russia. So the tensions are rising. And so then the suggestions to place American nuclear weapons on the territory. So these trends, how do you think these trends will evolve, and if there is any position for dialogue?
There's a position for dialogue. And firstly, I would like to say, when I talk about the Baltics, I talk about in a broader context. It's not only the sea, but also northwest Russia, the Baltic states, Denmark, and the Nordic countries, and also Greenland, Iceland. So this would be my concept of the Baltics. And secondly, I would like to start. I'll try to answer the moderator's questions, but I would like to start with just saying a few things about the EU policies. I think that we may all remember that the EU, in the very recent past, in the 90s and beginning of the 2000s, had a policy of Europe without divides. It was a soft security policy. It was an idea of common security, that cooperation, economic and social cooperation, would sort of bring about peace. And now we are experiencing a different policy, a policy of Europe with divides. It's a question of, like the moderator was pointing out, of military security, of actually increased military budgets, and also other things that divide us. Even if we have this electronic visa, which I received very quickly, when I took the plane from Helsinki to Moscow, it takes normally an hour and a half. Now I had to go through first to Istanbul, and then from Istanbul to Moscow, and it takes 12 hours. So the gap is about 10 and a half hours or something like that. But I would like to just quote two examples of this soft border kind of security that has been taking place in the Baltics during the 90s and the beginning of the 2000s. Before I go into the more military hard security questions, first of all, referring, for those of you who don't know what has happened, first of all, there was a policy of northern dimension. It was approved in 96 and reviewed in 2006. A proposal of the Prime Minister of Finland, to sort of cooperate and to show that soft security is a possibility, including Northwest Russia, the Nordic countries, also the whole basin of the Baltic Sea was included, and the partners were four. There was the EU was a partner, Russia was a partner, and the two countries in the Nordic who are not members of the EU, Norway and Iceland. There were four clusters who were working with health, with environment, with transport and culture, and a lot of projects were initiated and financed by all states involved, also by the EU. Now this is history. Another project or process which was on the Finnish-Russian border, the border that now becomes a NATO-Russia border, maybe a new Iron Curtain, three Finnish regions with the Karelian Republic initiated what we call Euregio Karelia. It was sort of a European model for border regions. This was Euroregion Karelia, where administrations, cultural actors, health and security officials work together to arrange people-to-people contacts and to sort of build, in my words, soft peace. Also, this process has now, with the closing of the border, has finished. It was very interesting to see that in 2014, when there was a crisis and the first sanctions were evolving, actually this kind of cross-border activities were exempt from the sanctions. However, this is not the case anymore. And I will just quote an interesting example that relates to today's situation. At the time, there was a German foundation in 2001 that wanted to take a Palestinian border region and an Israeli border region that wanted to work together and see how cross-border cooperations work at borders which have before been subject to war and have the pain of the scars of wars. So they were coming to North Karelia and to the Karelian Republic on a Monday in December in 2002, and we were ready to show how we can work together. And actually what happened is that Sharon started bombing Ramallah the day before, and everything was cancelled. So my point here is that soft security is always subject to the more macro level situations, and we can see this in the divides now that differentiate us. And here I think we can see that around the Baltic Sea, all countries are increasing their military budgets. There are military drills. Finland has joined NATO. Sweden is on its way. And so we have a situation where the hard security is taking predominance in the waters of the Baltic Sea. And there are a lot of problems with cables and pipes, but maybe those are minor ones. I think the problem I would like to take up here is the question of nuclear threats. I think we are approaching a situation where nuclear war is closer than experts evaluate that it's closer than even during the Cuban missile crisis. And so the question is, how can we avoid a nuclear war in the region? And here I quote a scientist from IMOMA and Megumo, who were actually studying this question. And it is, of course, a UN question, and it's a question for the Security Council, for the 5 permanent members, especially those because they are nuclear weapon countries. And I think there's an optimistic note in this situation where actually nuclear threats have become more commonplace than before. And the P5, these 5 Security Council countries, have just 2022 in January agreed that nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. It's an old quote from Reagan and Gorbachev at the time, and actually says that nuclear war should not be fought. Also, the G5 at their meeting at Bali last year and this year in Delhi has agreed, and all the 5 countries, including Russia, are included here. They have also agreed that nuclear weapons and nuclear threats are inadmissible, meaning that they are absolutely prohibited to be used. And this applies both to use of nuclear weapons and nuclear threats. Now, how does this relate to the Baltic Sea? This is the first time when all the 5 Nordic countries are in the same military union. Finland has joined, and Denmark and Norway are all members like Iceland, and Sweden has applied, and the application is waiting to be approved. Now, how can we work against nuclear threats and try to avoid nuclear war in the region? Norway and Denmark, as members of the NATO, have unilateral declarations by the governments that they do not they prohibit nuclear weapons on their territory. So we are working, all 5 countries, to try to prevent this kind of activity. So I think this is actually one of the things that can be done, and this applies to all countries around the Baltic Sea, that a nuclear weapon-free zone would be necessary. This is already the case in many places. We talked about Africa before. Africa is a nuclear weapon-free zone. Central Asia is a nuclear weapon-free zone. So there's this kind of incentive to try to think about the worst-case scenario and absolutely try to avoid it. And the scientists, Russian scientists that actually studied the Cuban case, they said that one of the most important things in avoiding nuclear war is communication. This was one of the things that solved the Cuban crisis. So I think communication is necessary. Thank you.
Госпожа Кронберг, вы...
Madam Kronberg, you were absolutely right in saying that preventing the nuclear war and direct military collision between Russia and NATO is one of the most pressing and relevant goals that we have in front of us. It's on the front burner. You mentioned the need for dialogue and communication as a tool to prevent many threats of military nature, as a risk mitigating tool. In this respect, I would ask with a request, Alexander, to follow up on this topic, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia. And Alexander Viktorovich, please share with us how in Russia we consider this security trend in the big Baltics. What are our expectations? What are the risks and opportunities here? I thank you so much, Fyodor Genrikhovich, for the opportunity to speak at this Baltic situation session. I can tell you that the situation in the Baltics looks minute compared to the events in other regions that are shaken, that are mind-boggling with their unpredictability and scale of the events. But in the evolution of the situation, I mean, the Baltic region situation, the evolution from virtually peace and cooperation to military confrontation. So it's just like a drop of water reflects the desire of the West to hegemony and containment of their rivals like Russia. I agree to previous presenters saying that a couple of decades ago, Baltic region looked very sustainable and devoid of any conflict potential. And very well prepared to absorb the best advanced shapes of international cooperation. And the final steps were the unification of Germany and independence, so acknowledgement of independence by the USSR of the independence of 3 Baltic republics. I'm not going to comment how law-abiding that was, but the transformation of that region actually was happening in a positive environment and was shaping all the prerequisites to hope that this region would become a ideal sample of international cooperation. Indeed, this part of Europe created and developed instruments of regional, sub-regional cooperation. That is, Council of Baltic States, the Council of Barents and North Atlantic Parliament Conference of Baltic Sea, North Dimension. I thank Madam Kronberg for mentioning them. It was a very good example. With the political will, the European Union strategy could be converted into something that is wider, because it's not just European Union, and they accepted Russia, Iceland, and Norway, and then there were programs of cross-border cooperation of the Baltic region countries, and there were 7 bilateral sub-programs with individual countries with a total budget of 300 million euros. And Anton has already mentioned other formats that were successfully operating and interacting. And I would mention here the then existing visa-free mode between Kaliningrad and the adjacent Polish regions. I remember in our discussions, including the Kaliningrad leaders, when we discussed how we should develop this visa-free mode. One of the problems was the number of pages in the passport, because people would travel and cross the border so often that passports would expire, very quickly. And we had to invent additional pages or whatever additions to the passport, so that we wouldn't impede the free movement of people. And just like the northern dimension, at a certain time we started negotiations with Brussels about transformation of Baltic strategy and European Union to a joint Russian EU strategy. And all this plethora of regional formats was organically embedded into a common space of Russia and the EU. And these tools worked for the interest of the people of the region, their well-being, environment, transportation, logistics, tourism. People's contact are now paralyzed or blocked or converted into another anti-Russian tool that today are just mushrooming. And the region was special because there was virtually no prerequisites for military confrontation. And the only problem that then was on the agenda is the transit to Kaliningrad and back. But that problem was settled immediately through bilateral agreements between Russia and Germany. And it has never been in the way of the interaction tools that I described. And speaking about the military balances and military aspects, even with a common effort to demolish the material heritage. It's in the Baltics where the process of shrinking the military forces, the process was very dynamic. In addition to European agreements, regional tools of trust and security were added, and they existed between Russia and Baltic countries, and we had special agreements with Finland, and now there is still a hotline, and this is probably the only thing that's left from the multiple bilateral agreements that we had. And I cannot but mention the stabilizing factor of non-accession of Finland and Germany to any military bloc. Even the geography, with three little Baltic countries and special position of Kaliningrad and proximity of all strategic and industrial centers to each other, proximity, it virtually demanded that all the regional states should behave responsibly in the military domain. And then we saw this responsibility of behavior. I would not, I don't want to paint everything pink, but speaking about the problems that then we saw in the relationship, they never had military nature. Humanitarian, they had humanitarian nature, like Russian-speaking people in the Baltic countries, and the shameful phenomenon of and the situation became worse as Central and Eastern Europe and Baltic countries joined NATO and European Union, and in the negotiation with the European Union, the candidate countries, we tried to put in every effort to prevent damage to Russian connection to those countries and to support the security level in the region. And there was with some success. And in the declaration about EU expansion and of April 2024, I'm happy to see Mr. Chizhov here, who personally participated in drafting this document that today sounds as a revolution. It said that Brussels commits to protect the human rights and people of the minorities. We know what happened to this protection. And today, 3,000 people in Latvia are under the threat of expulsion, of relocation, because they cannot pass the exam in Latvian language. And even the amendment in the law that restricted the age limit for the people by 65 years. So today, this threshold is 75. So I wonder, who tried to learn a foreign language after you are 70? People who were born there, who lived there all their life for 70 years, who contributed into the well-being, paid taxes, and so on. And now at 70, they have to learn a weird language, a strange language. Coming back to the military situation, this balance that was achieved then has been tilted to destabilization. And speaking about the economic relation, the volume of trade with Russia shrank sharply. Then the visa regime was imposed. The acute problem of passenger and cargo transportation to Kaliningrad was solved in November 2022 in Brussels summit, and Lithuania was forced to close the Ignalinskaya nuclear station. 3 countries announced exiting the Brel system, that is the one that connected the energy their energy systems with the ex-Soviet system. Now their energy prices, electricity prices, are made in a Swedish exchange, but not by concluding long-term contracts for supplies of electricity from Russia. The list can go on and on. I can just say that EU expansion did not actually erase the dividing lines, but moving the conventional lines to the east. The second blow on regional security happened, and primarily military and economically, was done by NATO expansion, the next blow. It is absolutely obvious today. I will remind you that even after the Baltic countries and Central and Eastern Europe countries accessed NATO, so there was still hope and certain tools to pacify, to mitigate the military situation and minimize the consequences of NATO expansion for European security.
Special role again as so to adapt the CFE. Treaty Conventional Forces, which covered Germany, Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Belarus, then the Kaliningrad and Pskovskaya regions. So after the adapted CFE, so that's supposed to be in 2002, the three Baltics so were supposed to start negotiations with other countries, participants of the CFE. So the military potential of these countries, the number of military personnel, artillery systems, MLRS, tanks, personnel, armored carriers, and international weapons, foreign weapons that could be placed or deployed on their territories on a temporary principle and conditions. Everything was to be coordinated with Russia and in a legally binding form. But naturally, so the United States torpedoed this, and so the adaptation of CFE. So they certainly assisted a terrible blow at the security in the Baltics. So they refused to codify the obligations of NATO, which was reflected in the main commitment about the refusal of NATO to place new weapons in the territory of Europe. So then it would talk about the increasing of NATO military presence in this region. So then we can conclude and say that starting from 2004, when NATO declared so the aerial patrolling, so they started to follow Russian military aircraft and following them and intercepting them. No one was asking them what actually happened to that region, that what encouraged the NATO countries just to go for such radical measures as intercepting Russian aircraft. So originally, so there were 4 interceptors at the Estonian military base, then 8, then 12, then the port logistics changed. The airports were just now that besides weapon storage, so they have several brigades in 3 Baltic republics, and so these countries in Poland and Baltic states, so they're the champions in NATO concerning the military spending. So then Poland declared to have the most powerful army in Europe. So I have a list of what NATO is doing. Briefly, so we're talking about creation of the military infrastructure, which is supposed to project power vis-a-vis the Russian Federation and achieving the military superiority. With this regards, so deployment of long-range artillery systems, MLRSs, tactical plans, increasing the military potential of anti-aircraft weapons, and then deploying additional international forces to this region, and increasing the scale, etc., the length of their presence, the duration of their presence. So they are just turning more and more offensive in their nature. So concerning this, so the revamping of the military forces, updating them, bringing more modern weapons, so that they could match. So this is certainly this is heyday for American military-industrial complex, because they're turning out more weapons, and certainly it puts in danger the European security. And so this process has acquired started to snowball after the coup in Kiev 2014, which was used by the West to justify the return of NATO. This was the fifth part of. So then they're fighting against the threat from the West, from the East. And so then they started to talk about inevitable attack of Russia, making Russia go to war against the Baltic states. So they started to go into this narrative. No one was asking whether Russia had such plans to attack the Baltics, and why should Russia attack the Baltics. But they started so then cutting off the Suwald corridor, the escalation for the sake of de-escalation, and all this just to pump the region into with military equipment and to create an arena of military opposition, confrontation with Belarus and Russia. Without this, NATO cannot possibly survive. Cannot possibly survive. Now, Mrs. Gromberg is right, mentioning the special status of some members of the alliance as applied to the possibility of use of nuclear weapons. But we should not forget the fact that the alliance announced itself a nuclear alliance. And it will continue to be nuclear as it is written in the strategic NATO documents until there is nuclear weapons in the world. So Finland entered NATO, so became a member of the nuclear planning group. And so the Russian Federation has been pointing out for a long period of time that the joint nuclear missions by NATO that provides for the participation of the non-nuclear powers, which is a violation of a non-proliferation treaty. And so many countries, not only nuclear powers. So then the air component now is designed meant for carrying and deploying American nuclear bombs, which are the free-dropping bombs, gravity bombs, nuclear bombs. But this is again that provides for the use of nuclear component. From this viewpoint, it is true that this NATO activity. And I agree with you. So it certainly reduces the nuclear threshold and provides for the transfer of military scenarios into the nuclear phase at the beginning of the war. And this is something that is being laid down. And as part of the military planning of the alliance, and we see that even in the practice of military drills and exercises, the nuclear component is becoming more and more important. One of them is the flying strategic bombers following the Russian borders, which are military capable, nuclear capable, and so they are designed to strike at the territory of Russia. So I'm not talking that in Finland everything will be applied and everything. But no, that the alliance increased the zone of contact with the main enemy. So by 1,300 kilometers, and the way it is reflected in all military documents, NATO documents, and the extension of the borders with Russia, contact 1,300 kilometers. And so now we know that Finland concluded the bilateral agreements. So all this military activity forms military reality that contains a big charge, a big potential for further destabilization, and will have to make us take relevant military measures. Some of them we have already told them about. They have been announced, strengthening our northern component, setting up the Karelia brigade, etc. But certainly we'll certainly go and adjust ourselves to the changing situation. So I mean that the military potentials that could be deployed or placed along our borders. And concluding, I'd like to say that I was talking about the how in which ways, what were the thoughts, what were the political projects were filled, and I mean when we talk about the previous 10 years, but now just in the ideas of our neighbors, the ideal of regional security is barbed wire, anti-tank trenches, then testing grounds, So then fighting for the right to deploy American weapons and boots on the ground on their territory, just to turn Baltic into the NATO Sea. Many NATO bureaucrats are talking about turning the Baltic Sea. So rooting out all Russian, removing the monuments then from the transportation hub, so this region is turning into a dead end and not a hub. So that's against the background of forming multipolarity when these two corridors, north, south, west, east, acquire strategic importance. Further, Henryevich, so our session is Baltic dangerous waters, and so but actually water in the Baltics will become calm. So then the last molecule of gas came out after the pipelines had been blown up. So when they stopped attacking their own energy security, and then when they hopefully. It will one day. I hope that it's kind of maybe the common sense will prevail, and then in case of goodwill and understanding the national interests of all involved parties, so we'll be able just to turn this dangerous course of events backwards and continue to come back and start cooperating again. That's the only way to maintain very fragile peace in this dangerous waters countries. Thank you. Son Viktorovich, you gave such a disturbing, dramatic, scary, dynamic picture, and where unfortunately negative trends prevail. And this is exactly what Mrs. Kronberg was saying, and we see that the dynamic, the evolution, and the security sphere leads us to the continuous growth of tensions, and unfortunately we're coming to the idea that we cannot resolve this issue, and which is very important to resolve issues, humanitarian, cultural, and other ties. My question is to Alexei Antonovich Gromyko, so the leading head of the Center of European Union in our country. And Alexei Anatolovich, what's your take? Do you think there is still room for dialogue? Is there room, so there were zones where dialogue is possible, without which we cannot survive? We understand that the trends in the sphere of security are very disturbing, and so we can discuss them openly now. It's good, and certainly, so claiming the other side being incorrect, and appealing to them to come to the common sense and avoid the continuous escalation, although the negative trend prevails. So what can be done in other spheres? Where do you think dialogue is possible and necessary? Is there any room? And Mrs. Kronberg wants to make a comment. Okay, I'll give you a chance to speak. Just 1 second. Let's have the last one to talk. Mm-hmm. So please go ahead. So please stick to the timetable. So I want your time responsibility. Fyodor Genrevich, thank you that you asked this question, that you put me on the right track. It is true. I think that the credo of the optimist does not mean that we need to wallow in our illusions, but it means that we need to objectively assess the situation and find ways and opportunities to untie the knots and to come out of the dead ends. It is true that I would start by saying that while very recently sustainable development specialists had been asked, so what kind of region could be most dangerous to the stability of the region and the slipping downhill into the dark waters, So then very few people would have said, would have named Baltic states or the Northern Europe, despite of all the problems and challenges that we had in those times. And so as we spoke about that, and North European way of life, then the Scandinavian democracy, security and safety of people's lives, wealth, well-being, and so this is because the relations that we borrowed after during the Cold War and Soviet times, so the experience of European neutrality, so there were many supports, many foundations, many grounds to think that there should not be anything untoward cannot possibly happen. That would be our conclusion some time ago. But now, so the scariest thing is what we heard is the ability to exist. Some trolls maybe exist in Norway, but in time, so we realize that in real life, not in fairy tales, so then some processes may develop which threaten not only the flora and fauna of our states, and including the state, not only the soft and the hard security issues. And we need to say that in the world of the 21st century, so the problems and challenges that have a universal nature, they will never go. And so then climate, starting ecological, pandemic, social, migration, etc. And it is obvious that this confrontation will definitely, one way or the other, will force different countries, irrespective of what kind of ideology they adhere to, but it forces them to join their forces. And I think that this logic will eventually start to break free. And I regard it's geographic. So when we talk about the dangerous waters, we need to talk not only about the Baltic region, but much wider. So I would say kind of Scandinavian Baltic macro region, I would talk, that encompasses the entire north, geographical Europe, Scandinavia, Finland, part of the North Atlantic, part of the Arctic, western part of northern route, and then northwest Kaliningrad, St. Petersburg, Murmansk, and this is eventually northwest so boundaries of the Union State. But the history, as we know, this region historically could be a place of discontent and source of peacekeeping measures. You remember that in the Helsinki Final Act on the security cooperation in Europe. So we remember the Olof Palme activities. What was his effort? Was his contribution? The commission that he headed, Olof Palme. That has published a famous common security in 1982. They published this Hansa Blisk activity, the way he behaved vis-à-vis the conquest of Iraq, an attack of Iraq by NATO. He was a Norwegian, Trygve, and he was replaced by Hammershøi. He was Hammarskjöld's. So he was Swedish, but nevertheless we have to state the fact that we have this very dense textile that has been created, woven for many years, and in the educational, social, cultural, economic. So this fabric has been woven for many years, and now it's been torn completely and to pieces. It's torn to pieces, and unlike the situation in Russian economy, we should say that even in Soviet times, in the epoch of the Cold War in the West, so there were hawks, and hawks tried to devalue, to belittle the notions of friendship between Finland and Russia. So then the relations that we had after World War II between the USSR and Finland, so they were a wonderful example of how two states could cooperate belonging to different political blocs. But what they are suggesting now to replace the former notion, and it is being pushed. It's not turning it Finnish. It's something like Estonization, not Finnization, but it's Estonization. That's a new term that has been suggested by academician Dinkin. So instead of pragmatic cooperation, so breaking up all ties, instead of mutually beneficial cooperation, instead of that, so they are replacing it with military escalation. And so at the same time, practically all countries of this macro region are facing the same problems. Similar problems, there are many, for example, migration, because we all see how the political landscape of in many European countries change, in Finland, Denmark, Sweden, and so then Netherlands. You see how it's changing. And we see that uncontrolled migration, and in the event of this even when it's controlled, but it's politicized intentionally. So then immediately, so problems at the borders start to occur, and technically they could have been settled very easily. So what we see that's on the border between Belarus and Poland. Now we're witnessing the same between Russia and Finland. So they could have been settled. And or what is Belovezhskaya Pushcha. So this is the oldest in Europe natural reserve, and so it's included in the list of the global legacy, UNESCO. UNESCO, there's the woods, very old. So then then animals, wildlife, absolutely unique, bisons, etc., which makes this natural reserve unique. But they started just to build fences around it, and certainly it would degrade and destroy the wildlife and flora and fauna. Yes, or for example, sinking military, so thousands of tons of weapons, toxic weapons that by allies on the decision of the Potsdam conference were sunk to demilitarize Germany. So this problem is there. So thousands of tons of this military equipment was sunk. And then the Kursk promontory. So again, natural legacy of UNESCO, and so then joint suggestion was Lithuania and Russia. They just came out with this proposal together, this joint plan, and we know that now just it's blocked completely, and we know that it's not Russia that.
And today we heard a lot about the Kaliningrad area, but I will say again that this region of our country has special standing, special position, and increasing tension around it cannot but cause concerns in Russia. I'll remind you that in 1914, Chuck Hagel, then Minister of Defense of the United States, started promoting the thesis of 2% of GDP spendings for defense, said that it should all happen because Russia is at the threshold of NATO. Russia is located very close to NATO. And now From our geopolitical point of view, considering NATO expansion, Kaliningrad situation becomes more dangerous, and common sense tells us that we need the special security measures and transparency not to miss some kind of bifurcation of history. In this region, we have absolutely common environmental problems. Recently, I saw information that a Wade military fighter having flown 100 miles, emits just like an average passenger car in a year's time. So several seconds of the military plane emission equal one car per year emissions. And the Nord Stream explosion was the largest technogenic disaster in history in terms of the quantity of methane emissions into atmosphere. In Denmark, official data says that approximately 800 million cubic meters of gas went into the European atmosphere. In Germany, they say that the emission equals 1% of all the dirty emissions of Germany per year. I believe we need to think about it. We should not forget it. And there are kind of sparkles of hope that the Arctic Council will not get extinct, finally. In the Arctic space, the cooperation keeps shrinking. Russia had to exit the Baltic Council last September, and the Barents Council, and we all remember how the Western countries' family virtually blocked the regular activity of the Arctic Council when our country was chairing it, was supposed to chair it. Now, under the chairmanship of Norway, the situation may be fixed, may be repaired, but there is no guarantee for that. I will use the same trick when I go back to the name of our session, the dangerous waters of the Baltics, the hazardous waters. And for a long time, Europe was considered to be probably the most comfortable and safe place on Earth for living. And from the point of view of soft security and hard military security. And it's not the fault of Russia. It's not Russia to blame that the Baltic region and Baltic Scandinavian region, unfortunately, more and more is turning into a confrontation field. And, there are too many serious problems. It's a bad sign. And one should not actually waste the opportunities to solve those problems. We certainly need to build a Baltic platform in a wide sense of this word in order to practice common sense, and people who have some common sense could come back to solving the problems that we are discussing. Thank you, Alexei Anatolievich. You gave us the whole panoramic view on the challenges and threats in soft security and political trends that evolve in the region, and primarily in relations between Russia and the EU countries. So now, passing the floor to Nadezhda Arbatova, I would like to ask her You're one of the scholars, researchers of the European Union in IMMO and in Russia, and enjoy extensive international reputation. You understand and you know in depth the political trends and economic trends that happen, that are seen in the European Union. What about the European countries of the Baltics? How do they consider the situation in the region? What do they see? What do they expect? Fyodor Genrikhovich, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. So I wanted to speak about the place of the Baltic region in the European security, about the controversies and the dilemmas of the region. And they are certainly related to the European Union because most of the countries are members of NATO and the EU. And no doubt, the tension between Russia and the West in the present situation plays a huge role for the condition of the region and the situation of insecurity. The Russian-Western relations over the last 30 years have gone from lost opportunities, great expectations, to unprecedented crisis. But I wouldn't underestimate the feedback in the context of the Ukrainian conflict. The tension in the Baltic region, in the sea and above the sea, create dangerous incidents that can trigger direct armed conflict between Russia and NATO. It is especially true because the membership of Finland and Sweden in NATO expanded the zone of responsibility of the North Atlantic Alliance and increased the common border to 2,600 kilometers. And in case of this is the direct collision zone in case of direct conflict, and the Baltic Sea has become a NATO sea. Actually, though NATO still controls the Baltic Sea, the countries accuse Russia of aggressive plans. And so we need to be reminded that the first division of Europe happened in the most beneficial period in the 90s, when the post-communist space was divided between two unequal military unions. NATO has become responsible for Central and Eastern Union, and OSCE for the countries of to the east of Vienna. And the next divide happened in 2004, when the Baltic countries, when they say Baltic countries, they mean Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania accessed NATO. And though the West never considered them a part of the Soviet Union, but in fact, it was the first division, first breakup of the post-Soviet space, which certainly increased Russia's concern about further expansion and the movement of NATO and approaching Russia. In response, Russia made certain steps to increase the military power of the Western European military structure, which certainly caused concerns in the West, in the NATO countries. And so now we have a situation of prophecies that come true and double standards. Recently, the foreign minister of Lithuania, Gabrielius Landsbergis, reminded the words of John Kennedy when he visited West Berlin. He said, "I am a Berliner." And Landsbergis added that just like the West Berlin, the Baltic countries in the 21st centuries can successfully become Western Berlin. And in my view, it is that this similarity creates associations, opposite association, as the history knows, the Berlin crisis of 1948, 49, 61, and Europe of Big Berlin agreements of 1970s. These are the two different Europes, two different models. What did Landsbergis mean that when he said that the Baltic countries can become the Western Berlin of the 21st century is not very clear. But if he meant Europe of the Berlin crisis, then that's the dead end, way to nowhere, road to hell. It's not even the way to the past, not the path to the past, because the present situation is much worse than then, because the arms control will be the thing of the past. The role of the organizations will be void. And then the nuclear arms may be returned to Ukraine and the Baltic countries. In what case this scenario may come true? In my view, this scenario can materialize if the conflict and at the global level, the relations between, the situation is linked to Russia and the West. If the Ukrainian conflict, sooner or later, it will be over by a peace treaty or a truce, or if the negotiations don't take place on peace treaty. So probably it will just be frozen. The front line, the contact line will be frozen, and it will be a division of Europe, dividing Europe. The second scenario of the Berlin agreements of the 1970s is much more optimistic. It will return Russia and the West to cooperation. It will, and finally, there will be a forum about the new order in Europe. And the Baltic countries, in those two scenarios, can take absolutely different space. In the first case, they will be a region that will absorb the blow of the military conflict. And it's ironic because those countries were looking for security, but in case of this military conflict, they will find themselves in the epicenter of the conflict. And the second scenario means that the Baltic region may take a very positive role. And we mentioned the cooperation. We have experience of that. Cooperation in the region, the northern dimension, and this accumulated experience can be of great use in the future. In conclusion, you see, my speech is very brief, and in conclusion, I want to say that this conflict that we are living through, this crisis in the East-West relation, was predestined. It was we were moving to it like a Greek tragedy. But in the Greek tragedy, is the gods or some kind of high powers that decide. But this conflict actually was created by errors of human beings, the politicians on both sides. Thank you, Nadezhda Konstantinovna. You were speaking about the risks of the growth of military and political tension, and you spoke about the incidents in the sea and in the air. We keep monitoring at IMMO the incidents of the sea and the marine and air incidents. And our statistics shows that from the start of special military operations in Ukraine, the number of incidents in the sea and in the air in the Baltics went down. It is not a bad indicator. It confirms that both sides understand the risks, and both sides consider those risks in their military planning, though on both sides the military activity, especially in NATO, it is really boosted, and so both sides are being careful. Madam Kronberg, I promised to give you 1 minute, and then we shall take questions from the floor. We shall have 5 to 7 minutes for question.
And about the increasing tensions, as you referred to me as a person that has worked with peace for a long time. First of all, I agree that, as you mentioned, that NATO is a nuclear alliance as long as nuclear weapons will exist. And Finland is now a member of NATO and also under the NATO umbrella. But NATO has never threatened anyone with nuclear weapons. It is a question of nuclear deterrence, like in the Cold War, it was on both sides. So it is a passive deterrence. But if you look at the Russian nuclear threats that have been issued in different ways, on all means taking the use and also others recently about attacking some nuclear country, some non-nuclear country in Europe. So I think it's important to understand that the use of nuclear threats and nuclear weapons is illegal unless there's, according to international law, there's one reason, one situation where you can use nuclear threats, and that's if your nation, the state, is in danger of not surviving. And I think this is not the case in the situation today. And also, I think the Russian military doctrine itself says that Russia will only threaten and only use nuclear weapons if the survival of the state is in danger. So I think in this situation, in the war that's going on, the Russian state is not in danger. The second thing, and here I would...
I'm sorry.
I was just saying, as a Finnish politician, about the Finns joining the NATO. The Finns have always been, majority of the Finns has been always opposed to NATO. But after February 22, the number increased, and the politicians had to draw the conclusion of joining NATO.
Госпожа Кронберг, вы...
So, Madam Kronberg, you touched upon very sensitive and important topic of nuclear deterrence. So I can tell you that absolutely Russia at the official level, not in a single document of strategic planning, not in the strategy of national security, military doctrine, neither in the basis of the state policy in nuclear deterrence, does not provide for a situation whereby Russia would use nuclear weapons for pressure or some threats. We can also say about all the speeches of the Russian president and the foreign minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov. In my view, this is a topic that is being kind of abused in the West. And distorted and abused in the United States when they say that Russia is going to threaten someone with nuclear weapons. And then they get hysterical about the possibility of use of tactical weapons. In IMMO, we made a presentation, and it's an open presentation. It's published, and it caused. So I'm not going to talk any more about it. This report. Has become really popular, enjoyed great attention. So now we have time for questions. So please Tell me, we have governor of Kaliningrad area, we have our Finnish guest from Finland, we have deputy foreign minister on European security. Please ask specific questions to specific people, to guests. So yes, please. Introduce. Yes. Fedorov Artyom from Russian Technical University, Mira, and the university named after Immanuel Kant. I used to live in Kaliningrad for a long time, and I'm familiar with the problem. There is a Russian proverb: "Don't buy a house, buy into and buy your neighbor." So probably we should make a step forward to our European partners, and considering the special status of Kaliningrad, cancel restrictions for entry of European goods. They may do whatever they want, but for us, probably it could become a bridge. Yes. In some 10 years, when the relations get to normal. As for special approaches, so your humble servant was actively lobbying exceptions for Kaliningrad area in the response measures of Russia. I said that the European transport people, and there was a surprise for some, have access to this market that in Russia and on the whole is closed for them. As for the goods, I will not be speaking about it at length, but the trade is still there. It goes on. It continues. It has not stopped. It fell by about 30%, by 1/3, but nobody says that there are no goods. Technological equipment, many things. We keep getting them. And we don't see any problems, just benefits. And we intend to keep it that way. As for the consumer goods, unfortunately, our situation in the first edition of the law.
At the beginning of the 90s, it led to that agriculture was completely destroyed. Because what was brought from abroad, so no taxes, no duties, no VAT, and that brought about complete destruction of the processing industry and agriculture, and the other way around. In 2014, our anti-sanctions, so actually the Poles, the Danish, Lithuanians, and many others, the Indians, so they're one of the biggest investors in agricultural segment of Kaliningrad. So then new steps. I can explain why. So then about the goods. Transportation. So now, just in the last 4 days, so in Chernyshyvsky, it's the only customs entrance. So they reduced the Lithuanians before the new year. They got the instructions of the customs office, and that we are checking all the cars, all the trucks, and we just let only one truck in, one automobile in. So that's instead of there's 190 cars one way that entered, so less than 60 came, and I don't know why. Why should I take any steps in this process? I have so that we need to backtrack probably. There's additional damage. So how to form negotiating position, because the Western ethics will push them to test them, to increase pressure, to increase sanctions, and so if there is no response. And so they will think that they will just be filling out, moving forward. They will be thinking of something else. They will thinking up other things. Cooperation and bridges is okay, but first we need to put them under the cold shower, and then we'll start thinking about bridges. Good afternoon. I'd like to thank. Introduce yourself, please. Katerina Lebedskaya, Imma Moran Fellow, and to International Ethical Problems Department. And so there's a wonderful presentation by Alexander Viktorovich, and wider representation of Alexei Anatolyevich. I like that. All this allows us to, so at least I get the impression that we have so that then the West, the Arctic front of hybrid war. That's what we're facing now. But you expanded on it. The geographical dimension of Baltic Scandinavian, and remembering that the Baltic Sea is part of the Atlantic Ocean. That's why we can say that the transatlantic, so we're talking about transatlantic issue. So one question is obvious. I agree that the hot phase, there will be no war. But remembering that the sprays of the Baltic Sea may go to the Atlantic Ocean and then to the Pacific Ocean. Maybe those are the prerequisites of transferring this local hybrid war into the global hybrid war. The ways from Atlantic may go further. How to put it better, the profession of diplomat does not provide for the scholastic general considerations, whether there will be nuclear war, there won't be a nuclear war, because the essence of our diplomatic efforts that we're taking right now, so they're aimed at de-escalation, and they're not aimed at, we're trying just not to allow for the nuclear war and to stop the nuclear war, and all the initiatives of the Russian Federation, including the main obligation, strategic obligation, commitment that was reached during the that there will be no winners in nuclear war, and so we adhere to that, and so we need, at the same time, so we cannot but see the risks, and we see these risks, they float, and the essence of my presentation was that if we would take the Baltic region, so then these risks, so they are man-made. It's not the result of some supernatural conflicts that may happen just in this or that part of the world. This is the result of man-made, that's a conscientious policy pursued by the West to prove the necessity of NATO presence and for the United States to keep NATO as an instrument of influence in Europe, and they want to prove it. And now we see the total subjugation of the EU to the goals and targets of NATO. If you open so the declaration of NATO and the EU of January 8th this year, so it's so obvious and it's so sincere, and the level of subjugation is amazing to which the EU agreed. So naturally, so in our view, we need to diminish the risks, but not only by way of offering peaceful initiatives. And by the way, so the thing is that what I just enumerated as instruments that we thought would be sufficient in order to lower the level of confrontation and the risks of escalation. But they said that these are the military measures as well, that we'll have to take these military measures, because our adversaries should understand that under no circumstances they would never achieve military superiority. That's why any application of force should be certainly taken out from any reasonable scenarios of the confrontation with Russia. This is it. Yes, but Russia is an object of hybrid war, so opened against us. This is obvious. We know that hybrid economic pressure. So then lots of unlawful sanctions, demonizing Russia, information war, cyber attacks, and so it's all there. It's the works, and so which falls under the definition of hybrid wars. And I don't want just to take any more of your time, but always. So the attractiveness of the EU as a European project, it used to be the fact that this project was set up, was created to always exclude the possibility of a war between France and Germany. So they are mortal enemies, fought for centuries. So they founded this golden key. So then integration, interdependence, and so that we could go to Strasbourg and take a tram and go to Baden, and so so then not understanding which country you are in right now. But now that the EU and NATO vis-à-vis Russia, so they're acting in a completely different way, diametrically opposite way. Instead of cooperation, interdependence in this region. So then the new borders that they're building up. So the barbed wire, the trenches, test grounds, the works, and this creates tension definitely, and the risks as well, because there could be risks of accidental incidents. So Russia actually came out with this proposal. Some were implemented Russian NATO Council that allowed just to diminish this level of threat in over the Baltic Sea. But now just what we see the erosion of this commitment and absence of political dialogues where we can discuss logically in a systemic measure, systemic way, these measures. And certainly the risk of escalation, they are there, but this is the result, this is the man-made conscientious policy pursued by the West. Unfortunately, we have set up our, we're at the end of our time, and so we have come to the end of our time. I wanted to say that this topic that we've been discussing, and in a very nice way, and great interest everyone paid to it, has many dimensions. And I'd like to thank the participants of the session that different dimensions have been touched upon of the situation in the Baltic region. We tried to prove, and all the participants of the session, it's not only the region of confrontation and tension, but this is a region of opportunities, social, economic development, co-development, and mutually favorable development. Ecosystems, very fragile ecosystems that we need to take care of. Mutually beneficial cooperation. Whether we like each other or we don't like each other, whether we have military planning vis-à-vis each other, but there is an ecosystem of the Baltic Sea. So there is Kursk promontory. So there is. So then we have fishes, wildlife, marine biota, and everything. So we have lots of ecological problems and everything. And we need it. It's all ours. Or for example, these chemical weapons that was sunk after World War II. So it only requires dialogue, attention, compromise, searching, and cooperation. And this is something that. Yes, certainly we need to continue this dialogue, and Russia is ready for the dialogue. Thank you very much. Thank you, our respected participants and those who listen to us. Thank you.
Да, сессия 8, подъем глобального юга, начнется в 17:45. Dear ladies and gentlemen, session 8, Rise of the Global South, will begin at 5:45 p.m.